Good evening. This is Dale Lamb, Gardner Webb. This is Mels 603, fall of 2016. I've got about 7:04 p.m. in the evening, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I hope some folks will join me as we go. Some housekeeping issues. I believe I'm going to have to move next week's session to 6 p.m. rather than 7. If that's the case, I will send you an email notification the next day or two. A meeting, I think, has been scheduled for the college I need to attend or be online for. So our normal 7 o'clock meeting next week, I'm planning to move to 6. I will confirm that via email if that is the case. That's first note on my list tonight. Second note is a clarification on discussion boards. I've made this clarification several times, and I even sent an email, but I'm going to make it again. Under discussion board, I have a number of discussion boards. I believe about 15 or 16. I have 7 and 7A. Those discussion boards, as you can see on the screen now, go with our weekly lessons. Those are to be completed. The time frame is on your own, though. What I mean that is it's not optional whether you do them or not. They have to be done, and I have to grade them. It's optional when you do them. They are not time specific. So, hey, Kenya. I think Kenya just joined me. Hey there. Kenya, can you hear me? Kenya, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good evening. Hope all is well.
It is. You too?
Good. Thank you. I was just going over, I just mentioned, I'll reiterate, next week I'll probably move the session to 6 o'clock. I'll confirm that by email later in a couple of days. I got notification today of a online meeting at 7, and if that's the case, if I'm not excused from that, we will do our session at 6, and I can be online at 7. But I will send an email notification. The second point that I had tonight is, and I've sent an email to this effect, discussion boards 1 through 15, including 7 and 7A, those are required to be done. It's optional when you do them. I don't have a time frame for them. There's not a weekly turn in. You can do them at your convenience, but they do need to be done by the end of the semester. If you want to do them all in 1 week, that's fine. If you want to wait a while, that's fine too, but they do have to be completed. There was some debate about that. They're not optional. When you do them, is optional. Now, the components for review that you have to put into discussion board so that you can upload your work for review and post reviews of other people's work. Try to stay on track with that. Other folks are dependent upon you, so try to stay on the time schedule with the uploading of those, both the components themselves for peer review and your peer review of other classmates' work. That is time sensitive, but the discussion boards are not. They do have to be done, but it's not imperative that they're done on a weekly basis. You can do them as you need to. Another question has arisen, and I have it on our weekly schedule. There are no comments in TaskStream anymore. When you go to TaskStream, you simply go for evaluation now. Comments are given during the peer review stage. If you will look at our weekly schedule, if I can pull it up, it'll take me a second. When I pull up the weekly schedule, you will see on the far right column, in terms of your TaskStream work, there are no submit for comments. It's all submit for evaluation. It'll take a second for this to load and for me to switch shares and show you this. But this is what I'm talking about in terms of trying to stay on the time schedule. Let me go to a new share. Share screen. Here we go, enable editing. All right. Okay, as you can see over on the right-hand side, Skip C due in discussion board for peer review. Skip D last week was due in discussion board for peer review. This week, Skip E is doing discussion board for peer review. 2 peer reviews of Skip C are due in discussion board, and Skip C is due in Blackboard assignment Dropbox and in task stream for evaluation. Now that's the column that's important. Again, our weekly topics, your reading and your assignments, if you want to do them weekly, I think that's great. I think that would be wonderful. Let me go back and do share screen again and get that where it will work. No, that's the wrong one. Here it is. All right, you should be able to see that now. So again, our weekly topics, our weekly reading, our weekly assignments, I don't have deadlines on those. You can do them as you need to. But the far right column, your evidence artifact work, you do need to stay on schedule with that because others are depending on you, both to put your work in so they can peer review it and for you to peer review their work so they can stay on schedule for submitting to task stream. And again, this week, Skip C is doing Blackboard assignment Dropbox. That's for me to grade it and for you to put it in task stream for evaluation. There are no comments anymore in task stream for you folks. You put your work directly in for evaluation. So hopefully that clears up any misconceptions that you have. Again, your coursework for me, your reading, your weekly assignments, your discussion boards, those are at your convenience. Evidence artifact work, there is a schedule for it because others are dependent upon you. And I have it all here each week, what's due for me and what's due in task stream each week. Everything in terms of peer reviews, what goes where. I have a complete schedule over here in the right-hand column. Make sure you read and keep up with that. The other, do it at your convenience. Okay? All right. New share. Back to the desktop. Here we go. All right. Continuing with housekeeping issues tonight, if you will go to course overview, what you will see is I have added a link at the bottom. I've added a couple things at the bottom of our list. Hey, Jewel, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. So I've added just a couple of things at the bottom of our course overview and information list here. First one is professional competencies and task stream. As I told you last week, the only change in the new handbook, you folks were already doing peer reviews and Zoom reviews. The only thing that was new or different for you folks this semester was putting a evidence or proof into task stream that you had accomplished the 21 competencies. But you only have to put one proof in for each of the 21 competencies. As I told you, that takes the place of that final meeting that we used to have between the candidate, the internship supervisor, and the principal to go over the list of competencies to make sure that all 21 of them had been met. That could be quite time consuming, and I think principals didn't like the idea of spending 2 to 4 hours on something like that. And so Gardner-Webb has gone about the process of making it much easier for candidates now to prove that they have done those 21 competencies. So they've made you a place in task stream to drop your competency in terms of a document or a flyer or minutes or an agenda, something of that nature that proves that you met that competency. Again, we used to do that in a meeting with your principal at the end. We had a list of suggested activities. We went over that list, and students had to prove that they had done those things to the satisfaction of both the internship supervisor and the principal. That was quite a lengthy and tedious process. So now it's much more streamlined. You can do it as you go. It'll be much easier. Principals will be much happier. So there is a link there to a YouTube video by Dr. Neal that explains that process of how you go about downloading that work into those proof items or evidence items into task stream. Again, it is not evidence artifact work. I hate that work evidence because that implies that it's evidence artifact work. It is more of a proof And it's not just reiterating your artifact work. It is something that has been generated from your internship hours. That speaks to your internship hours. So in that 400 hours of internship that you do with your principal, you are to meet all 21 competencies. Rather than doing it in a meeting, you do it now. You upload it into TaskStream. I also have added student information, as you can see down at the bottom. Now, that's none of that information is private or critical information. It's just the student's name, their Gardner Webb email address, the town where they live, location, so if you want to get together, and the school where they work, so you can see where folks are that you're working with this semester. So I think that's all the housekeeping matters that I have for this evening. This is Zoom session 4. We're continuing with student discipline this week, student behavior, responsibility, foreseeability, district field trip policy, those kinds of issues in terms of the role of the principal in not only dealing with issues that pop up at school, but with foreseeability, dealing with things, trying to put programs and activities in place that prevent bad things from happening. Again, that's called foreseeability. Having a supervision plan in place, having bullying prevention programs in place, having antecedent behaviors programs in places that deal with bad behaviors at a lower level before they become bigger, more serious behaviors. And so let me start with the role of the principal. This is what I introduced to you last week. This is General Statute 115C 288, the duties and responsibilities of the principal. Let me open it up right quick. And there's a couple of points that I want to make sure that I note for you this week. We covered making accurate reports to the superintendent and local school board. We covered conduct fire drills and inspect for fire hazards. This is the one that I want to cover tonight. To discipline students and assign students duties to teachers with regard to discipline, general well-being, and this speaks to due process. We talked about that, both procedural and substantive. Substantive is what is your due process? What protocol do you have to follow in discipline students? And then the procedure, did you follow that protocol? You're also required by law as a principal to, if I can get it to resume share here. There it goes. You are also required to assign duties to teachers in terms of supervision. Now that supervision is not only during the regular school day, what we call a duty roster, covering the cafeteria at lunchtime or at breakfast time, covering the parking lot and the bus lot and the car rider lane, both before and after school. Hall duty, any of those kind of activities, we call that a duty roster. Principals are required by law to assign those duties to teachers. You can track your discipline usually through PowerSchool in terms of where most of your incidents occur. Most good principals and assistant principals do that. They track their incidents by location and try to get more supervision in those areas. That would be a part of that foreseeability. If you know that when you have a class change and there's hot spots on your campus. If you don't put additional personnel there, and it's become well known that that's a problem area, that's a foreseeability issue. That could open up that liability in terms of being negligent and having to pay money. Both the district and the principal, you can be held financially liable if you know that nobody's supervising behind the cafeteria at lunchtime and kids congregate there and you didn't assign anybody to supervise that. Somebody gets hurt, then that's going to be a problem. We also have what I refer to as a supervision schedule, and I've talked to you about that earlier this semester. That's one of those things that you're going to be working on through the OMA this semester. A supervision schedule is for extra duty or extracurricular activities, ball games, band, after school clubs, things of that nature, weekend events. For some reason, principals think that their responsibility ends at 3:30 when the bell rings. It does not. If you have activities on your campus, those need to be supervised just like at the same level as if it were during the day. One of the things that happens a lot is we assume that whatever teacher is working with a group is adequate to supervise that group. That may not always be the case. Generally, you have enough coaches in football and the other sports that you're covered in terms of the 1:45 ratio of adults to students. But there may be issues where you have a club like a key club and you've got 100 kids in there and you've only got one sponsor, and somebody gets hurt at a key club car wash, somebody gets bumped into or run over by a car, and there was only one adult there. That's not going to go well for you. So you need to make sure that you have adequate supervision for not only daily events, but for extracurricular events as well. And I do want to reiterate the point that you are responsible for everything that happens on your campus, whether it's during the day or after school. That doesn't matter. So you need to read over these laws, and they are referenced here for you. You need to make sure, and they're also referenced in the reading that I had you do on foreseeability and accountability and liability and those kinds of things. So make sure that you cover that. You are to, as I told you last week, report certain acts to law enforcement and superintendent. Law enforcement is first. It's clear in the law here. You are, if an act of crime of violence happens on your campus, you need to inform authorities first, and then make your report to the superintendent or the deputy superintendent. And so those are the laws, or that is the law that governs that. And so you need to make sure that you're involved with that. I've got a couple other things for you tonight. Let me go back. Let's see if I can go back to my original here. Okay. I'm not going back. Let's try something else. Okay. All right, back to Zoom session 4. All right. Antecedent behaviors. This is the one that sometimes is the hardest to grasp for emerging administrators, because you've only ever been involved at the teacher level. Antecedent behaviors, by definition, are small things that precede bigger things. Let me give you a couple of examples. as soon as this thing loads here. My PowerPoint loads. So while it's loading, if you see bandanas on your campus, if you see gang symbols on kids' clothing and notebooks, and that goes unaddressed, eventually what you will see behind that gang activity is guns and drugs and violence. Better to deal with that at the lower level than for acts of crime and violence to occur. And then you've got problems. So here's a PowerPoint that I put together a few years back when I was still with CMS. Identification, prevention, identification of antecedent behaviors and development of prevention strategies. See, part of foreseeability is you're supposed to develop strategies. If you see small things happening on your campus, you're a professional. You're supposed to know that those small things are going to become big things if you don't deal with them. If you see a lot of inappropriate touching or inappropriate display of defection, a lot of kids, a lot of boyfriend girlfriend stuff in the hallway, pretty soon you're going to have sexual offenses will pop up. Little things become big things. That's the philosophy of antecedent behaviors. And so when administrators would say to me, well, how can I can't help that these acts of crime or violence occurred, it's just random. No, it's not just random. Let me say that again. Acts of crime and violence aren't just random. There are precursors, there are signs, there are antecedents that if you're paying attention, you're going to know that these things are going to occur. We're talking about gang activity, cyberbullying and bullying, sexual harassment, sexting. Those kinds of things become weapons, drugs, assault with injury, sexual assault, sexual offense, rape. Those are the things that happen. These are the smaller things that become the bigger things. And as a reminder, the reason why we're trying, it's the right thing to do to try to prevent crime and violence on your campuses. But remember, there's federal legislation in No Child Left Behind that says children don't have to attend both low-performing academic schools and unsafe schools in terms of crime and violence, what we call persistently dangerous schools. There is a calculation. There is law behind it. There is a calculation. You cannot have more than one incident for every 200 kids per year or 5 incidents per 1,000 kids a year. And those incidents, we know what they are. These are the acts of violence. We have crime and violence, but this is the acts of violence that count against you. Homicide, assault resulting in serious bodily injury, assault using a weapon, rape, sexual offense, sexual assault, kidnapping, robbery, and indecent liberties with a minor. Those are the acts of violence that count against your total for persistently dangerous school. So you better take those things seriously. Again, I've had folks argue that they didn't know when these things were going to happen or couldn't predict or couldn't foresee that these things could happen. And what we know is there are antecedent behaviors, smaller things that happen that if left unchecked, they become these bigger things. And that's the whole notion here, that you need to deal with the little things before they become the big things. So you need to be monitoring not only your data, but your school. And here's the law behind all of that and what will happen to you if all of that occurs. You have to get audited. You have people come to your building and they watch your data. If you get too many of these things happen, and in the end, what will happen as an administrative staff, either you'll get replaced or students will get to go to another school nearby that is not unsafe or not persistently dangerous if you continue to have acts of crime and violence happen on your campus. One of the things that happens when you get audited by the state, the first thing they ask you is what programs, treatments, or fixes have you put in place to try to stop some of these things from happening? And you certainly don't want to tell them, well, it's just random, I can't help it when they happen. No, what you do is you go through the identification and training with your staff to pick up on the smaller behaviors that become the bigger behaviors. That's how you deal with acts of crime and violence. You have to put a program in place to educate your staff on, if you see this, this is going to eventually become that bigger thing. So we have to stop it at the smaller level. And so we call that violence prevention education. And yes, violence can be prevented. Um, Risk factors that contribute: overcrowding, having too many kids in one place at one time, and not enough adequate supervision. Poor design, inefficient use of school space. What that means is allowing kids to get in parts of your building where they are hard to supervise, or become unsupervised. Lack of disciplinary procedures, allowing the little things to continue to flourish without any consequence. Student alienation, multicultural insensitivity. That goes back and speaks to arbitrary and capricious, which I covered for you before. Arbitrary is we punish some kids and not others. That's where that multicultural insensitivity and alienation comes from. Kids notice that certain kids get a lot of punishment and certain other kids don't get any. Again, not being consistent in your discipline, not being arbitrary or being capricious. Yes, you punish this group of kids, and yes, you punish that one, but that group of kids gets the book thrown at them, and this one doesn't. Those kinds of things lead to escalation of minor behaviors into major behaviors. Teacher and peer rejection of at-risk students. That's a big one. Where we don't have, that one is addressed through diversity training, not only for your staff, but for your students. This especially happens in districts where redistricting occurs and populations change from time to time. And it's not like, it's in schools where all the kids, their parents didn't go to school there, but you're putting groups and communities together. That happens a lot. And that's happening more and more, even in rural areas now, as we get immigrants into the area coming in. Some of them may not be English speakers as their first language. That becomes an issue in schools that leads to violence. Student resentment towards school routines. This one is a tough one. Generally, what that means is that students, especially in secondary school, don't feel that they have a voice or any input in what happens in their daily schedule. For example, there's only 2 lunch shifts and it's overcrowded and they don't have time to get their lunch during the time allotted. That was always a big one in high school. Running 3 lunch shifts is really bad, no matter how you work it, because generally in the middle of the day, that if you have 3 lunch shifts, you have a group of students in the second lunch shift who go to class for half a class and then go to lunch and then come back for the second half of class, which is not a really good thing. But if you don't do that and you just have 2 lunch shifts, a lot of times you're overcrowded and that school routine is not what students want. So that one becomes tough. So some of that can be taken out with how you run your daily schedule. In my opinion, if you don't want to run 3, you should run 4. You should run 4 lunch shifts. The cafeteria ladies won't like that, but we don't run school for the cafeteria ladies. You'll be a lot better off running 4 than just running 2 if you have an overcrowding issue. And of course, lack of proper supervision. Not supervising during the day, not having a duty roster, and not having adequate supervision at after school activities. As I said last week, and let me reiterate again, it is not a best practice. It is not a best practice to put a sign-up sheet in the teacher's lounge for after school activities. That's a recipe for disaster. That's hope. That's not a plan. And that's a recipe for disaster. You need to make sure you assign teachers to after school duties. Don't just let them choose what they want to do, because they'll choose not to. Or you'll have everybody come to the popular events and nobody come to the unpopular events. Protective factors at school that can help reduce violence, positive school climate and atmosphere, clear and high expectation of all students, strong student bonding at school, high level of student participation and parent involvement, opportunities to gain skills and develop socially, visible and accessible staff members. These are things that can help reduce violence and set the culture for your school. Anti-violent measures along with the school environment, using your district code of conduct properly, again, avoiding arbitrary and capricious decisions, intervention teams, intervention specialists, behavior management personnel, security personnel, alternative learning programs, alternative schools, and transitional cases. These are the kinds of things that can help from a district perspective, things that can help your school outside of the things in your school, which is better supervision, diversity training, all those social factors that I mentioned before, right here, addressing these issues. And then your district can help you with some of these kinds of things. Gang awareness education. A lot of our violent events, unfortunately, in schools come from gang behaviors. This is a little primer on gangs. It's not meant to be inclusive, but the overview is types of gangs, locally identified gangs, level of involvement. You have traditional, non-traditional, hybrid, tiger, and you have criminal enterprise, which used to be known as motorcycle gangs. These are some locally identified gangs in North Carolina. And more of them. These are generally in the Charlotte area, but some of these are outside of Charlotte, but these are locally identified gangs. There's different levels of involvement. And generally what you're going to see in the middle school years and even in the late elementary years is a fantasy fascination with gangs, and that's represented by the little boy down here with his cape on. And you progress through those steps. And so the idea being, if you can engage students, if you can begin a support system and work with them at this level, at the fantasy fascination level, hopefully they won't progress through the ranks and become a gang member or a hardcore gang member. That's the notion here. Students don't start out being hardcore gang members. There is a process that they go through as they get older. If you can identify these behaviors early on, these antecedent behaviors, hopefully you can take steps to address them. Obviously, these are tags that show the presence of gangs. These are things that have been taken from students. Tattoos on students. And so the notion here is you need supervision. You need to keep your eyes open. You need to be aware of what's going on. Again, in foreseeability, if you see a lot of gang activity happening in your building and you don't address it, you can rest assured you're going to have violent incidents that occur. You can either ignore it and put your head in the sand and hope that it goes away, which it won't, or you can deal with it. You can address the situation. All right. The second biggest area where you need to work on antecedent behaviors and education for your staff is on sexual harassment and identification and prevention, because sexual harassment leads to sexual crimes. If we went back and looked at all the crimes, 4 of the 9 acts of violence are sexually related crimes. Sexual assault, sexual offense, rape, and indecent liberty with a minor. Those are the things that you're trying to prevent. The roots of those things, how those things start out, is generally sexual harassment. Harassing behaviors are how those things start. And so you need to be not only aware yourself, but educate your staff on recognizing and preventing and dealing with sexual harassment.
What's the difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault?
Oh, there's a big difference. Harassment's verbal. Assault is physical. By the state has a manual that defines these things. That's a good idea. Wow, thank you, Luke. I'm going to pull that up while I'm working on this. Luke's question was, what's the difference between harassment and assault? Harassment's verbal. Assault is physical. Uh, Let me quickly, if I can, your screen is probably paused right now. I'll be right back with you. www.google.com. And let me CNCD. Okay. Okay, here we go. I said here we go. There it goes. Doesn't want to go. There it is. Okay. Okay. Now, let's see. What I've got is the state disciplinary data reporting manual, and it's not working really good. So it has definitions of what bullying is. It has definitions of what sexual harassment is. But more importantly, it has definitions of the acts of violence that Luke just referred to. And so we can go to the back of that manual, and it will give us our crime definitions of all 16 acts of crime and violence. And remember that not all of these assault resulting in serious personal injury is an act of violence. Assault using a weapon is. Assault on school officials is an act of as a crime, but not an act of violence unless there's serious injury, and then it would be classified as assault. But if we come on down, oh, we're gonna get there. Okay, here's rape. Here is the definition of rape. Here's a definition of sexual offense. Here is a definition of sexual assault. Sexual contact with another person by force or against the will of the person, and it's very specific. I mean, it even tells what part, what touching what part. These are pretty graphic. I'll let you read these on your own. But to get back to Luke's question, what's the difference between a sexual assault and a sexual harassment? Harassment is verbal, of a sexual nature. Assault involves touching of some sort. And then we have sexual offense, which is the next level, which is penetration of some sort. Pardon my language, but that's the next one. And then of course we have rape, which is at the top of that list. But these are the acts of crime and violence, more specifically the acts of violence. But it starts out with sexual harassment. It's a verbal thing. It's inappropriate language, inappropriate comments of a sexual nature that lead to these kinds of things. So let me go back to here. Okay, so again, sexual harassment, that's at the level that we want to address it. Obviously, we may have to address some of those sexual infractions, sexual assault, sexual offense, rape, indecent liberties. We may have to deal with some of those. But what we hope to do is address it at the sexual harassment level. And you have legal standing to do that. The law is clear that you may address those things, that you may punish and sanction students and staff members for that kind of behavior. I have all the statutes here. I have the definitions. I have the relevant court cases that give you the legal wherewithal to deal with sexually harassing behaviors before they become sexually assaulting behaviors. All right, and now the last of the things that are really antecedent behaviors that you must deal with is school violence prevention, is bullying and cyberbullying. Back to that same manual where I just was, it has definitions of those, and it also has the law that allows you to punish kids for bullying and cyberbullying. And you can punish for cyberbullying even if it didn't happen on campus. If they sent the text or emails or shot the video somewhere else, but if they are harassing students, bullying, cyberbullying students at your school, you can sanction students, you can punish them for that behavior. Now, one caution here. In my opinion, in cyberbullying cases, my opinion is to bring in authorities immediately, because sometimes those things get further and wider than you could ever imagine or ever dream of. Cyberbullying is kind of the growth industry of this decade, and you think it's just a few kids in one building, and before you know, you find out that it's much broader and deeper, and there's other things associated with it. Where I live here, just north of Charlotte, the high school in our community here at Huff High School, what started out was one fellow sending some inappropriate pictures of girls around, ended up being, pretty much a ring of pedophilia and underage contact and some other really bad things. The good news was, as soon as the school discovered that young man and what he was doing, they turned it over to authorities who were able to investigate and find all of these other things that were going on, and it got pretty wide and deep, and he was 18 years old and he's in jail now. Because most of the girls were underage. Not only was he taking pictures of them or having the pictures, there was also some contact going, some indecent liberties with a minor. Now, that handbook that I just showed you, those statute says that you have to be 16 to consent. Some of the girls that he was having contact with were in the middle school next door, who were 13, 14, even freshmen and sophomores at the high school. Most of these girls were in the 13 to 15 range. They were all underage, and he was 18. That's indecent liberties with a minor. Also, in that statute, it speaks to mental capacity. The age of consent in North Carolina is 16 unless you are mentally incapacitated. So that means if you have students on your campus who are in self-contained exceptional children's classes, they do not have the mental capacity to consent to have sexual contact. And it is a crime to be involved with them, even if they are 16. We had a case like that at a local high school in Charlotte, where the young lady, the school said, oh, it's consensual because she's 16 years old, but she was self-contained EC. That won't go well for you as an administrator. Number one, not knowing the law, and number two, allowing inappropriate sexual behavior on your campus. So, bullying and cyberbullying many times jumps the fence from just hate and bullying over into the sexual realm. And that's why I said if I had a case of cyberbullying, I would hand it over to the police, because it may be more than just bullying. It may be, as that case was at Huff High School, it jumped over from cyberbullying over into sexual offense and sexual assault and indecent liberties with a minor. Um, but thankfully, the school handed it over to the police, and we're able to get to the bottom of that. So, one of the things that I had you do in your discussion boards, and is technology. Do you let kids carry their phones? I mean, what do you allow in your building? You need to go back to your school district's code of conduct in terms of what's allowable at school. But as long as we have cell phones and cameras, it's going to be difficult to keep the lid on bullying and cyberbullying. That's bad enough, but then it only gets worse when it leaps that fence and jumps over into the sexual arena. And generally, that's where it's going to go. It generally starts out with a little bullying and cyberbullying, and it's not appropriate, but many times it ends up with sexual infractions on the backside of it. So that's why I would have the police involved immediately on anything that had to do with cyberbullying. And so again here, I have all of the laws that are pertinent to that, definitions of these. I won't go through all of them. This is a good one for you to go through. Includes how you can be harassed. I have all the laws and statutes in North Carolina that go with that. This is a big one. I am going to cover sexual harassment in depth later in one of the Zoom sessions because it's so big and it's become such a hot topic that it requires me to spend a whole Zoom session on it. So that's a good question, Luke. Yes, I'm going to spend a whole session on sexual harassment later on this semester. There's so much of it here. I'm going to cover this entire presentation here, but you can go through and read this. I've got some scenarios, I've got some cases, and got a lot of things here. Obviously, this one is an hour long in itself, and so I'm going to cover this later in the semester. Let me go back to here. Again, this manual that I have pulled up for you here, I hope that you can see it. This is the North Carolina Disciplinary Data Reporting Manual from Department of Public Instruction. It has all this information in it. It has all the infractions. It has all the reporting rules. It has all the crime and violence. It has persistently dangerous. Everything that I pretty much covered tonight's in this manual. It is available online. I do have it under one of my weekly sessions, but you can just simply Google NCDPI Disciplinary Data Reporting Manual, and it will pull it up, and you can read the definition of all these acts of crime and violence. You can read the state's description of sexual harassment and bullying and those things. And so this is what it looks like. If I can get it to go up just a little more. There it is. North Carolina Disciplinary Data and Reporting Procedures. Actually, you can Google it online. Okay. All right. All right. Section 4. Okay. And hey, Amanda. The last one that I have for you tonight is bullying prevention. I see my time is nearly up, so I'm going to pass over this one quickly. Again, these are behaviors that become more serious behaviors, that become your acts of crime and violence. So this is preventative. This is about that concept of foreseeability that I had you go over this week in your reading, and liability if you don't take steps to stop some of these things. This is a good primer on school bullying. It's not that long. It's only 16 slides. Consequences, recognition, and prevention. Just basically says you're required by law to address bullying. Has some statistics. These are things why bullying is bad. Keeps children from succeeding in school, creates a hostile environment, less likely to succeed academically. and has more statistics as to why you should do it, about the act, um, forms of bullying. What this is the good stuff here, starting with slide number 9. What you can do. Plans to improve the learning environment by intervening in the bullying process. Again, antecedent behaviors, the little stuff that becomes the big stuff. Starting with slide 9, it has some really good ideas as to what you can do to stop bullying. So I don't have time to read all of these, but you should. Again, this is something that, and here are some good references in the back that you can look up on your own. And this is about bullying prevention. So starting with slide 9, what schools can do to stop bullying. Again, this speaks to your responsibility to keep your building safe, to try to prevent acts of crime and violence, and to practice the concept of foreseeability. And it's not only for your school to be a better place, but let's face it, nobody wants to get sued for negligence. And you know that that's pretty much what's going to happen. If somebody gets hurt in your building, somebody's going to sue. And you need to be able to show that you took all steps necessary, not only to stop the big stuff, but that you have plans in place and training in place to stop the little stuff before it became the big stuff. So that was kind of the theme of the night. How do we address the big stuff by addressing the little stuff first? And so that's the process of dealing with antecedent behaviors. All right. I've got a little time left. I always try to leave a little bit. Questions that you might have for me about antecedent behaviors, foreseeability, liability, tort liability, being financially responsible, supervision, duty rosters, supervision schedules. Everybody gets that concept, that there's more to school than just what happens between 8:30 and 3:30. And there's more to it than just bell ring, go to class, bell ring, go to next class. That you have to be proactive in how you deal with potential problems on your campus.
I do have a question.
Yes.
If there's no after school program, or if there's nothing going on after school, and no one is at the school, is the school still held liable if something happens on their campus?
Yes. That's in that manual that I just showed you. Yes, you have to report what goes on your campus, whether school's in session. I got hit with a burning of the school building in 95. I was principal of junior high in Charlotte, and over the Christmas holidays, somebody drove a car onto campus and parked it up next to a building and set it on fire. And yes, that we had to count that on our acts of crime and violence. I've had police chasing cars down the street and the car crash on the school campus. The police arrest the person in the car, find drugs, alcohol, weapons in the car. Yes, the school has to report those. You are responsible for what happens on your campus 24/7. That has to be that it happened on your campus. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I had a principal one time that argued that he shouldn't have to report a death on his campus because it happened after the bell rang, but it happened in his parking lot. One of his students went out and committed suicide at a high school at about 15 minutes after the bell rang. He felt like, and I said, well, the bell ringing had nothing to do with the fellow's dead. Or I've had administrators say, well, we didn't catch the person. Well, that's the same theory. If I shoot you and leave town, don't get caught, are you not still dead? If it happens on your campus, day, night, weekend, school session, not in session, you have to own it. Now, you won't get thrashed by the people in the central office if somebody does something in your building at night, and just drove on your campus and broke into your building or did something like that, but they're not going to beat you up over that. But if you had if you had community, if you had an event at night and something happened and you didn't have adequate supervision, or you weren't there, you had some event at night and something bad went on, then they're going to be after you. That's the difference. So I hope that answered your question, Jewel. All right. Other questions that anybody has about foreseeability, accountability, having incidents that occur on your campus, being responsible for those?
What is tort liability?
Tort liability is generally when you knew something was going on and didn't do anything about it. And tort simply means that you're financially responsible. That speaks to our discussion board question this week, that administrators are being held financially accountable. That's called tort liability. Not only does the school district get sued, but you get sued personally now. If you knew that boys were dragging girls into the bathroom and doing bad things to them down at the gym, and you didn't bother to go to do anything about that, or send anybody down to supervise that. Luke, how long have you been in CMS?
About 5 years.
I think you're a little too late to remember what happened when Waddell was still a high school before it became Waddell Language Academy, when it was just Waddell High School. You remember that?
Yep.
There was an incident in the locker room there, and a video of it got out of assault. The problem with that one was that they were about once a week, they were going down having like Fight Club down at the locker room. And everybody in the building knew it. And nobody was bothering to stop it and then a kid got hurt. That's what we're talking about. And so if you know something is going on and you don't address it, and then somebody gets hurt, you're sued. I mean, tort liability is you have to pay yourself, not just the school district. Good question. But I remember that case specifically in that I think there were 19 kids that were involved with that one. But the reason why it came to light and got dealt with by the district is one of the kids fell during the fight and hit his head and was injured pretty severely. I think that one made the national news too. And it didn't matter that he was a willing participant. His family still sued because he got hurt. I mean, their claim is these are young people. If you don't supervise them, because they have a bad idea, doesn't mean that and that they did something that wasn't really smart. That doesn't let you off as a school and school personnel for not addressing their bad behavior. Kind of like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. When you discipline kids, parents are mad. But if you don't discipline and they get hurt, through foolish acts of their own, then you're going to be liable legally and financially. So that's not good either.
I have a question.
Yes.
We have Chromebooks throughout our entire school.
Right.
So that's starting to be a county-wide thing. So if you were a principal at a school with Chromebooks all through the building, would you have a meeting with everybody, parents included, and educate on cyberbullying some, or how would you handle that?
Well, boy, would I. I'm trying to remember what year it was. It's probably been 2008 or 9, so that's been 8 years ago. Mooresville Graded School District was the first school district in the area that I can recall that they didn't have Chromebooks, they had MacBooks. And what they found almost immediately, Mooresville's just a little small town, small graded school district about 30 miles. Was it 30 miles above Charlotte? Yeah, about 30 miles, 25, 30 miles above Charlotte. And they passed out those MacBooks and didn't do any training for anybody with them. And they had to call them all back in because they were getting on inappropriate sites. They were sending inappropriate texts and messages. I mean, wow, it just snowballs very quickly. But excellent question, Amanda. Absolutely. generally what folks are doing now, and what my understanding of the districts that are adopting Chromebooks or MacBooks now is, they make everybody go through a training before they'll even give them to them. And the training speaks to inappropriate websites. It speaks to inappropriate emails. It speaks to bullying, inappropriate messaging. It speaks to sexual content and all of those kinds of things. And so districts have learned now that you can't just hand those things out. So yes, most districts require that staff and students and parents go through training before they actually give them those Chromebooks or MacBooks now. But I do remember the Mooresville incident where they just handed them all out, and they had to. But they got the problem fixed. To their credit, they got that problem fixed pretty quickly.
Well, we have so much prevention stuff on the, I guess on the Chromebooks now, like a bunch of, safe, concepts or whatever, but still we seem to be running into problems with kids sending emails. Like
Yes.
what you're saying. Yeah.
They have this software that has been developed and been loaded on now that can't be taken off. It's kind of like a spy that keeps you off certain websites and certain other things, but it doesn't stop. My understanding is it doesn't stop emails and instant messages, though.
It'll stop if it's inappropriate. It'll come to us, but it has to be really inappropriate for it to get to us. And by that time, it's probably gone too far.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, if I were principal right now, that would be one of the things that would be on my agenda once a month at the faculty meeting is you need to monitor the computer labs in the building. You need to monitor if we've got those carts with the computers on them in the building, we need to monitor those. If we're handing them out, we need to make sure that we've gone through all the protocols and done all of those kinds of things. I would probably do one of my colleagues in Charlotte Mecklenburg, when one of the things that he did was he would have parents and students sign basically a pledge that they wouldn't do those things.
Right. We do that, but I just think maybe with sixth grade parents especially, take it a little more serious because every student has one to take home with them.
Oh, yes.
Serious.
I would do some parent education. I would make sure that everybody had read the rules and would try to do some parent nights, some education with them.
Right.
On the use of those things, and definitely have them sign off on those things. It's very difficult, but again, I don't mean to be ugly. Please don't misunderstand me now. Quote me directly. The notion here is we can't prevent everything.
Right.
But the idea is can we protect ourselves when we go to court? Did we take all reasonable measures? What's known as the reasonable person standard in the law. Let me repeat that. The reasonable person standard. Years ago, it was known as the reasonable man standard, but now it's the reasonable person standard in law, which says, did this person take all the steps that was reasonable to prevent these bad things from happening? And so I don't mean to sound negative, but we can't prevent everything from happening. But the idea is prevent it from becoming a liability for not only ourselves personally, but for the district that we work for. Can we protect ourselves and our district from lawsuits over things that happen in our school through prevention, dealing with antecedent behaviors, foreseeability, those kinds of things? And that's why I use the Mooresville example. They didn't take any a priori upfront steps to try to prevent that stuff, and then when it happened, but to their credit, when they saw it happening, they pulled them back and started again, and then did some of those measures.
So my question is, what would you do with a teacher if an incident continued to, well, let's say you have the same kid that's doing an inappropriate search or sending an inappropriate email at about the same time every day, which happens in the same teacher's classroom. How would you handle that teacher?
And that would become a personnel issue. It certainly would.
Okay.
Because Now, I'll have to tell a bad story on myself now. I was high school principal in Charlotte, and my secretary buzzed me from the outer office into my inner office one day and said, the Secret Service is here. You don't hear that every day in the school business. The Secret Service is here. And I said, send them in. And they work for the U.S. Treasury Department. But one of our students in the computer lab had sent a threat to Hillary Clinton when she was the first lady. From our computer lab at school. And so the Secret Service, there's a Treasury Department in Charlotte, so the Secret Service came over. Let me say they weren't amused, and it wasn't funny to them. They're serious kind of people. Not a lot of smiles from that group. But one of our students had sent a death threat to Hillary Clinton. She was, President Clinton was still in office back then. I was high school principal, and that didn't go well for him. But what saved us is we had adequate security and technology, and we were able to fairly quickly identify who had done that. Now, again, I can't stop people, especially he was an 18-year-old high school senior, so it didn't go well for him. That ended his aspirations of college. And, I can't prevent him from doing something, I can't always prevent everything from happening. But
right.
Because we had steps in place to identify him, we, that went better for us, and things, we survived that incident happening. And I say we, me and my staff, we survived that. But because we had adequate security, we had kids with an ID number. They logged in. They had to log into the computer. We knew exactly who was doing what. And that to prevent something like this, so that we would know if something like this happened. Can't prevent it always, but you can take steps to deal with, so that what's going on. So again, quote me correctly, we can't stop everything from happening, and that's not really the point. The point is stop what we can and legally protect ourselves from that we can't stop from happening. That's the whole notion. I know that sounds cynical, sounds self-serving, but this is a business. You need to stay in business. You need to get a check every month and feed your family. And that's many times what this is about protecting yourself. Yes, you want to protect the staff that works for you and the children that are in your building, but you've got to take care of yourself and your school district too, because if you take a hit, your school district takes a hit too. And they're not very happy about that. So that's the notion on antecedent behaviors, preventions, foreseeability, and reasonable person standard. These are kind of hard concepts. They sound easy, but when you start peeling back the layers, sometimes they're a little bit more difficult to understand. But always remember, yes, we want to prevent as much bad stuff as we can from happening in our buildings. But if we don't prevent it, we at least want to be legally responsible, so that we don't get killed when we go to court, both professionally as a school district and personally financially. Getting back to Luke's question, we don't want to have to pay out of our pocket if things don't go well, because that's insult to injury. Other questions you might have for me? All right. Again, I think I'm going to have to do a 7 o'clock session next week for the college. So I'm going to go ahead and say, but I will let you know in a day or two by email if we're going to meet at 6 next week. But I think we're going to have to meet at 6 so I can be available to do that 7 o'clock next week online faculty meeting or something. I think that I'm going to have to do. If you have any other questions, email them to me. I'm pleased with your work. Remember, your discussion boards, it's only optional when you do them, not that you do them. You need to do your discussion boards. I don't do weekly turn-ins on those, but you got to get them sometime this semester. Try to stay up with your task stream work, your evidence artifact work, because others are dependent upon you, not only to peer review their work, but for both of you peer review one another's work. So you got to put your work in, you got for them to peer review, and you got to put your peer reviews of their work in. So stay on track on that. If you have questions about the turn in on evidence artifacts, go back to weekly schedule. I have over in the right-hand column, I have weekly what to do in that. Everything else is at your discretion other than those. Not to do it, but when you turn it in. All right, I will see everybody next week. Everybody have a good week. Thanks.
But